of it for a while, and I kind of want to just tell you how things have evolved over time. So in this right column here, we have percent of the total population. We have race over here on the left side, percent of vaccinations, cases, and deaths. So very early in this pandemic in Indiana, it was predominantly Black and brown people that were being hospitalized and dying. And we've seen that shift, due to events like this, due to education, due to people doing the right thing, due to you guys, your outreach. We've seen a shift where there's less than Black and brown people being hospitalized, and these numbers are becoming that, more like the population. The part that we still see some gap is that if you look at this column here, if you're Black or brown, you're still less likely to get vaccinated in Indiana. So we definitely don't want that to be the case. That's as of a couple of days ago. Almost 13,000 people have died in Indiana. And I think that that's important to understand. And, when we talk about these trials, I want people to understand that almost 4 million people have already been vaccinated. So for those that are waiting, what are you waiting for? And we'll talk about in the world, but almost 1 billion people have been vaccinated, and we'll talk about that number, but it's pretty close to 1 billion now. So we have three vaccines available, and I don't anticipate that we'll have any more. But we have the Pfizer, which you give 2 doses, 21 days apart. Moderna, 2 doses, 28 days apart. Johnson & Johnson is back in action. There was a pause for 10 days and restarted yesterday, and we'll talk about that. But these all have emergency use authorization, which means that they're not fully approved, but they are approved under the pandemic. So how do they work? I think that's important to understand. So we have basically 3 different categories: the genetic variety, viral, and the protein-based. And in the US, we don't have any of these protein-based vaccines approved at this time. But this is the difference between them. So it's how they get the vaccine into your cells, and your body is what causes that immune response that prevents you from getting the virus. So with Pfizer and Moderna, they use what's called mRNA. And with the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, which is not approved here, they're using the viral vectors. This mRNA technology has been around for 10 years, but has not been used in a vaccine to date. And we'll talk about that. This adenoviral or viral vector technology has been around since the 70s and has been used in viruses previously. So we inject it into your arm. It gets into your cells through either the mRNA or through the viral vector. Your body takes it up. It makes your immune response that makes antibodies to that spike protein. So that's how the vaccine works. So there is no possibility that you can get the virus from the vaccine, and there is no real interaction with your DNA from the vaccine, so it's taken into cells through that mechanism. One of the things that I really want to point out to everybody is that I'm going to make the statement that no corners were cut with the production of these vaccines, and I'm going to tell you how that's possible. So, because it typically takes 10 years to make a vaccine. And so here's the steps that were taken. So billions and billions of dollars were put into these vaccines. And that's unprecedented. Usually only have one person working on, one company working on something. I talked about the mRNA vaccines, how that platform was already made. In fact, the Moderna vaccine was made in 42 days. And who's given credit for that? A Black woman is given credit for the production of the Moderna vaccine. And I think that's important for particularly people that are Black and brown to understand that, this is something that we need to really celebrate. We had an unprecedented number of people volunteer for these trials, and I'll go through those numbers. So almost 75,000 people for the Pfizer and the Moderna. The infection is out there. So typically when you have a vaccine trial, you can't see if it's working, but because coronavirus is, so prominent, you can see if it's working within a few months. Unlike usual, they started to make the vaccines before they were even approved. And that has rolled out the production. The most important part, the actual review for the safety of these vaccines, no corners were cut there. Actually, the vaccines were reviewed quicker than usual. They were given priority, but the actual process hasn't been any different than it was for any other vaccine. And in fact, it's actually been, greater. And we'll talk about that for some of the Johnson & Johnson stuff. So these are the vaccine trials. I do want to point out that these are very high numbers, tens and thousands of people. So, over 75,000 for the Pfizer and the Moderna, 43,000. AstraZeneca, I highly doubt we're going to have to use this vaccine, but I put it on there. But at the end of the day, I want people to understand that this is a year ago. 220 million people have already been vaccinated in the US, and I said almost 1 billion people in the world. So it almost doesn't matter at this point what these trials were, but they were fairly robust. They had a good mix of, races and ethnicity. But, currently, we know that the percentages are good for representation about who's been vaccinated. I think it's important to realize that there are age differences. The primary one is that Pfizer is for age 16 and greater. The others are age 18 and greater. Pfizer is currently seeking approval for ages 12 to 15, and I anticipate that that'll probably happen soon. So let's talk about efficacy. So when these vaccines were first, conceived, we were comparing it to the flu. And for instance, for the flu shot, we mandated everyone has to get the flu shot at Eskenazi because, it puts us at risk, it puts patients at risk. And at the end of the day, the flu shot is only 44% effective. And we thought that was pretty darn good. And then lo and behold, you have Moderna and Pfizer coming up and saying that they're 95% effective for all symptoms. So, and I think that's important. So all symptoms, and this is against the original strain of the coronavirus, because at the end of the day, I think people need to understand that these vaccines, you can't compare them side to side because they were tested during different times. So when you look at these numbers, it's apples and oranges. You can't compare them, but 95% effective, that's a miracle. We were shooting for something about 44%. So to have a vaccine that works this well is unheard of. And I want to point out that it's all symptoms. So, you look at those numbers and you might say, okay, I want the one that has the highest number. Again, you can't compare apples to apples because they weren't tested at the same time against the same virus. And, we have all these variants that are, in the mix. So should you choose one vaccine over the other? And I do have some more thoughts about that after Johnson & Johnson, what I'll share with you. But at the end of the day, I'm sorry, but I don't care if you get the sniffles or you get a low-grade fever. We've all had colds before. I'm worried about those people that are being hospitalized. I'm worried about those people that are dying. And all of the vaccines are approaching 100% effective for that. So at the end of the day, get the vaccine that's available to you with a potential caveat that I'll tell you about. So, that's important. So don't look at those numbers and say that, 90 is greater than, 70, because 90 is not greater than 70 because they weren't tested the same. All right, so what is in the vaccine? I think this is an important question. So there's only, like 5 or 6 ingredients in, this whole thing. So it's either the mRNA or the vector, so mRNA if it's Pfizer or Moderna, and if it's Johnson & Johnson, it's this viral vector. And what do I mean viral vector? I guess I didn't say this. So that's a killed virus that, again, you can't get that virus, but they use a cold virus to be able to get that into your cells. They get it into your cells with lipids, or basically fat, that allows it to get into the cells easier. They stabilize that with some salts, with some acids and acid stabilizers, and they use some table sugar basically to get the pH of that mix just right. And that's it. There's not anything else in the vaccine. I didn't say anything about eggs. I didn't say anything about, shellfish. None of that stuff is a contraindication to getting the vaccine. And I'll give you some news about that too. But I think it's important to understand that these vaccines are safe. And we've never had safety data on anything in medicine or any kind of tracking like we do for these vaccines. In fact, there's two safety systems. We have this vaccine adverse event reporting system that they've been for the last year looking at side effects and issues with the vaccine. And then they also have this V-Safe that you're able to sign up for after you get the vaccine. So before the Johnson & Johnson stuff, the worst side effect that we would be concerned about was anaphylaxis. So anaphylaxis is you get something and it causes, rash, airway swelling, difficulty breathing, just like if someone that had a bee sting allergy got a bee sting. And that was 4.5 cases per million for the Pfizer and the Moderna combined. And since Johnson & Johnson is so new on the newish end, there were 2 participants in that vaccine that had that. The important thing to know is that we can predict who's going to have that reaction. And it's going to be people that have allergies that are probably known to them. And for those that have a polyethylene glycol allergy, and if you've never heard of it, you probably don't have that allergy, but you can get polyethylene glycol over the counter. So Miralax, for instance, if you're constipated, is polyethylene glycol. If you've ever had a colonoscopy or a bowel prep, you've had polyethylene glycol. So it's in a lot of different things to help, keep things, it's basically a fat. Polysorbate 80 is the other thing that is in toothpaste. It's in ice cream. It's basically what allows salad dressing to stay, the way that it does. So if you have had an allergy to that, you probably would know it. But at the end of the day, those are really the things that we're worried about for having this anaphylaxis. Again, I didn't say food. I didn't say shellfish. I didn't say if you have a bee sting allergy or a snake allergy, those are not a contraindication. If you have anything into the environment, if you have drug allergies, those are not contraindications.
You just went mute, Dr. Wright.
Thank you. The last thing I said is that these other allergies that people have had with other vaccines, those are not contraindications. If you've had COVID within the last 90 days, we want you to wait before you get vaccinated because you have your own antibodies to COVID, but they're not durable antibodies. We know that if you get COVID, that your antibodies probably last around 90 days. If you get a vaccine, it's at least double than that, at least 6 months and probably even longer. Already said no egg, no latex. There are no blood products, so approved for Jehovah's Witnesses. There's a little bit of controversy about this for Catholics, and I'll just bring that up. So as you guys are talking to other people, aborted fetal cells are used in medical research of all kinds. And in fact, it was used in all of these vaccines for research. And in particular for the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, they actually used some fetal cell lines in the production of the vaccine, but it's actually not in the vaccine itself. I already told you what is actually in the vaccine. So the Pope has given his blessing for Pfizer, and some of these U.S. bishops have voiced concern for the Johnson & Johnson. But again, at the end of the day, the Pope has said you should take the vaccine that is offered to you if you don't have any other options. So what side effects? So we can predict that most people are going to get some pain in the arm where they were injected, and up to 97%. And in fact, I had the Pfizer vaccine, both injections. I didn't have any pain in my arm, and I was actually a little bit upset about it, because you know that it's working if you got some side effects. Using this VAERS data, the most likely side effects are headache, feeling a little bit drowsy or fatigued, and some people get lightheaded. So that's why we want people to wait after you get the shot at least 15 minutes. For those that have bigger concerns, well, we have them 30 minutes. There is some thought that you get less systemic and local reactions with the, particularly at the injection site with the Johnson & Johnson, but I'd say that we don't necessarily have enough information just to compare that, again, apples to apples with the Pfizer and the Moderna. I do want to talk about this Johnson & Johnson, spend some time with that, because I think that's new to most folks, and since it was paused. I think that it's, I'll just say it out loud, that many health professionals didn't think the Johnson & Johnson vaccine should have been paused. I personally think that it was reasonable. Certainly if anyone, died after that was known, then, there would have been a ton of criticism. But at the end of the day, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is incredibly safe. The concern is, and this is a mouthful, but I think people need to understand when they hear it. So there's this, it's, the acronym is VIT. So it's vaccine-induced immune thrombotic thrombocytopenia. And what that means is that, the thrombotic part is clots. Thrombocytopenia is low platelets. In the US, and that's what they called it in Europe. In the US, they're calling it TTS, thrombosis with thrombocytopenia, basically the same thing. It's very rare. It mimics a condition of similar to heparin-induced thrombocytopenia for any medical folks in the audience, and so that means that heparin, the blood thinner that we give, causes low platelets. And this is significant because it causes blood clots in places that are atypical. And people have probably heard of this CSVT, which stands for central sinovenous thrombosis, which is a brain clot. And then you can get clots in the liver, lungs, and legs. And at the end of the day, anyone that has had the Johnson & Johnson vaccine within 3 weeks, we want them to be aware of symptoms of headache, abdominal pain, shortness of breath, and leg pain, which are, issues of potentially clotting. AstraZeneca, which is along the same lines as, I should say the same mechanism as the Johnson & Johnson, the rate of this is 100 to 250,000 per million doses. Johnson & Johnson does not seem to be that prevalent. And I do want to go through this data because I think it's important. So there was one man in the trial that had a blood clot, and they weren't really able to associate that with this same process. What we've seen that caused the pause is that there were 6 women in 6.8 million doses. And that was the pause, and that was what that's what the media was basically saying, so 1 in a million. But it's actually a little bit different than that. So we know that the age groups for all these clots were 18 to 49-year-old women. So when they go back, there's been 13 cases in 1.8 doses. So the incidence is about 7 per million. No men had a clot. And if you're greater than 50, your chances are, even less than 1 in a million. So what the CDC and the FDA has basically come out with is talk with your doctor about getting the Johnson & Johnson. And, good or bad, you guys got me. So I'm going to be your doctor, and I'm going to tell you what I would, tell you what to do. So let's talk about risk and benefits. So if you have risk ages, 18 to 49, so this clotting disorder, we talked about how prevalent it is. 1 in a million, 0 for men, and then 7 in a million if you're age 18 to 49. For this same age group, 18 to 49, your chances of dying from COVID are 1,810 per million. So 1,800 times chance of dying from COVID than getting one of these blood clots. And if you get one of these blood clots, we can treat it. We know how to treat it. Not to say that everyone's going to survive, but we do know how to treat it. Blood clots in general. So we talked about the Johnson & Johnson oral contraceptives. This is a different clot, 1 in 3,000. And if you get COVID and you see me in the ICU, about 1 in 5 people are going to get a blood clot. So clots are very common in COVID. So at the end of the day, they said, let's restart the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, as of yesterday. And they have a warning, talk to your doctor, but for really women under the age of 50. Now, my sister's in this age category. So she's 18 to 49. She wouldn't want to tell me, she wouldn't want me to tell you guys her age, but she's somewhere in that group. So her risk is 7 in 7 in a million. If this was the only option, I would tell her to get the vaccine, but it's not the only option. So I'm going to tell her to get the Pfizer or the Moderna. And I think if you are anyone other than this category, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is perfectly fine and is perfectly safe. So at the end of the day, again, to talk about the people that need to know these long-term side effects, I want to remind you that 32 million people have died from, have been infected by COVID. 567,000 of them have died. They're not all old, so 40,000 less than 55, 4,000 less than 35. And, now around, over 10 million people have these long COVID symptoms. Long COVID symptoms could be ongoing shortness of breath, cough, difficulty breathing, mental fog, all those things. I already mentioned 222 million people have been vaccinated. And the CDC hasn't come out and said this, but from my perspective and my study, 3 people have died from this Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And again, we know who they are. So young women. And I think that if we take them out of the mix, you have of those, 7 million people, you have 210 plus million people that have been vaccinated without any problems. And these are tragedies that that these people died, but it is so rare. The other thing that I want to just impress upon people is that you hear a lot of things in the news. I got the COVID vaccine and I had this and this kind of happened, but that doesn't mean that it caused it. So if I were to take 10 million people and just wave my hand over their arm and not give them the vaccine and follow them for 2 months, 14,000 people would die. 4,000 would have a stroke, 4,000 will have a heart attack, and 9,000 will have a diagnosis of cancer. And none of that has to do with the vaccine. That's causation. We don't know that the vaccine caused, any of those things. And it probably did not. This is what we call the natural history of disease. The CDC finally came out and said that it's okay for pregnant women, not just okay, that it's recommended for pregnant women to get vaccinated. But we've known that for, months and months and months. And, Dr. Kane had the, we're so lucky to have Dr. Kane, and we've been vaccinating pregnant women in Indiana for months, because the risk far outweigh, I should say the benefit far outweighs the risk of getting COVID. As as I already mentioned, as of today, almost 1 billion people have already been vaccinated. Just something about the variants. I think these can be confusing. So they have these, numbers, B117, and then, those go along with, where they were found. And, it's important that these variants are different than the wild strain, for instance, that Pfizer and Moderna were tested against. This UK variant is the most prevalent one in the US right now. It is more transmissible. It may or may not be deadlier. We've had some different results in studies. I do want to also point out that these are all variants of concern. That means that we know about it, but it still responds to the vaccine. A variant of high consequence would be a variant that does not respond to the vaccine and is killing people. A variant of interest would be something that we know that it exists, but we're not too worried about it. So this is an important slide. So we have all these variants. The UK, all of the vaccines still work against that. We know that this virus is going to mutate. It's going to continue to mutate as long as it's able to replicate. So we need to get people vaccinated so this virus has nowhere to go and it kind of just fizzles out. So at the end of the day, we need people to get vaccinated now before this, virus continues to mutate and gets out of control. This South African strain, for instance, resists the vaccines. We don't want that here. In Brazil, for instance, they're having, whether it's a second wave or surge, they're basically starting from square one again. All the number of people that are hospitalized. Over 50% of the people in the ICU in Brazil are less than age 50. So, this is becoming, a disease that's just not for the elderly. So we have to make sure that we're, reaching out to everybody. So why do we want you to get vaccinated? I won't go through all of these. We've hit some of these. People are dying. Younger people, older people are dying. This long COVID, is real. You can have no symptoms. And then, you can have this long haul COVID symptoms for, months and months afterwards. So at the end of the day, you, your family, your friends have a decision to make. And I think it is a fallacy to think that, you're going to write all your, all the risk on the left side and you're going to think about what are the benefits on the right. And then if they outweigh each other, then a light is going to go off because it doesn't work that way. Usually it's something like this, there's one thing that changes your mind one way or the other. And I think that we need to figure out what that is, let people ask questions. And I'll be honest, they may not trust me. They may trust you as a friend or family. We need to get questions answered and we need to get people to the right resources. But I do want to call out some things that we know that are out there. Fear, fear of, dying, fear of needles. Those are all things that can, really impact what someone's doing. This has been politicized, to the nth degree. This is a public health crisis, but yet everyone wants to, make their campaign based on it. At the end of the day, this is not a political thing. Our former Republican president, our former Republican vice president, our current Democratic president and vice president have all been vaccinated. They see that this is worthwhile. We talked about Operation Warp Speed and how corners weren't cut. Systemic racism. I mean, that's the one of many things that are going on in the world today. Racism, gun violence, things are crazy out there. But we have to acknowledge that. There's some people that are have concerns about that. The Tuskegee syphilis trials, for instance, were ongoing into the early 70s. Many of us were alive when that happened, and it's not it's not distant past. We talked about side effects. there's this trust and mistrust. We kind of talked about that, and how that we can, it takes all of us to fight that mistrust. Have people get the right information, and I'll give you some resources for that. There's all sorts of stuff online. I don't know why anyone would get their information from Twitter or Facebook, but people do. So I won't spend a lot of time on these. Just kind of hit some of the highlights why people within our institution have chosen to get the vaccine, keep their family safe. They've done their research. They trust in their colleagues. This one hits me every time I read it. I decided to get the vaccine because I would rather be safe than sorry. I've had family members that have passed from the virus, and I didn't want to be included in the over 400,000. And it hits me because I just told you that 560,000 people have died, and this was only a month and a half ago. We tend to not think about it. It's predicted now that by the end of the summer that over 600,000 people will be dead. But we've, for the worst, gotten used to COVID and people dying. I was not up to it at first, and my daughter educated me about its safety and importance. So how you can influence others. We're getting vaccinated so that we can see our grandkids. So I get that. This is some of my family: my son, my wife, my daughter, who's making a weird face there. So we're in Colorado. This is a while ago, but I got vaccinated for them. I get vaccinated to be around for them. My son says that he wants to be in a trial, get his vaccine so that he can go on vacation, go on the water slide. I get that. We all want to get back to whatever the new normal is, but I think that this is real to everyone. I do want to go through the vaccine eligibility real quick. We all know that it's open to everyone age 16 or older, starting last month. But why go through all this? Because one of the things that I hear is I can't get vaccinated because of whatever. I already talked about allergies and that kind of thing. And then people will insert, I have this condition. But I've yet to hear any condition, and I've yet to talk to any doctor that is a contraindication to getting vaccinated. In fact, it's a reason to get vaccinated, because we know that these conditions put you at higher risk. So if you're on dialysis, if you've had sickle cell, Down syndrome, if you've had chemotherapy, if you've had an organ transplant, if you've had leukemia, you should have already been vaccinated. If you have any of these early childhood conditions, cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophy, cerebral palsy, any immunocompromised state, including HIV, you should have already been vaccinated. Intellectual and developmental delay, pregnancy, people that are, healthcare workers, working on the front line, including our teachers, should have already been vaccinated. And the folks that are working in, educational environments should have already been vaccinated. So, those are the folks that are on the front line and should be vaccinated. So I just want to point out that, the vaccine, if you haven't had it, it can be difficult to get arranged, but there are some resources, the rshot.in.gov. You as a family member or friend can get anyone signed up. I do it for my patients. You could do it for them as well. There's a number of libraries, AARP will get people signed up. You can call 211. There's federal vaccine programs through Meyer and Kroger. We have these mass vaccination clinics. They're back on with the Johnson & Johnson. The next one is today through the 30th. Remember, I was going to quiz you about the ages, but I guess I won't now. The Johnson & Johnson is ages greater than 18 and older. On the 30th, they're having what they're calling a family day. So they're going to give the Pfizer on that day. And again, that's the one that is down to age 16. So, at the end of the day, get vaccinated. These are my recommended resources. If you go to the coronavirus.in.gov, if you're worried about Indiana, it'll link you out to whatever you ever wanted to know about coronavirus. from the vaccine to the disease to the trials. CDC, if you're interested outside of Indiana, if you're interested in the world, go to the World Health Organization. I'm going to stop there and let's answer some questions.
Hey, Dr. Wright, thank you again for attending our presentation today on coronavirus. Got a question about mutating. If the virus mutates, does that mean next year we'll have to take another dosage of something, either Pfizer or Moderna or
It is very likely. And I think that, well, I know that both Pfizer and Moderna have already come out and said that they plan on giving people boosters. And it's probably going to be likely. And as I mentioned, we know that the Pfizer is good for at least 6 months. And why 6 months is because that was really the bar that they needed to hit for getting the full approval. But they're continuing to study it beyond that, and hopefully it'll be longer than 6 months. Hopefully this will be something that we'll be able to get our yearly shot. But the data is out there. But I would be surprised if we didn't have to get some kind of booster because of these mutants.
Yeah, and to back that up, in light of the mutants, what are your thoughts about getting additional boosters, and are there any potential consequences with regards to this vaccine going in year after year? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for any drug, you need to study it over time. But the way this works is to build up antibodies, and those antibodies are gone, and that's the reason why you need a booster. So it's really not in your system anymore. So it's unlikely that you're going to have long-term effects from getting shot after shot after shot. But we really need to figure out what the schedule is going to be. It'll be interesting because we're coming into spring, we're coming into the summer, where we're going to anticipate that COVID cases should go down, but they're going to pop right back up again in the fall. So this might be something that's seasonal, where you need the booster shot before the fall.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that. Also, I heard you mention the VIT. I was wondering, VIT thrombosis, I don't know the language, but you mentioned about that, and I was thinking about, is there a test for that for persons who may have that kind of condition where they could have a reaction down the road, in light of those 6 people? I know it's a small minority, but in light of those 6 people who had an adverse effect.
Yeah, so what we know today, that if you have had the Johnson & Johnson and you develop within 3 weeks, and I want to be clear, if it's after 3 weeks, you don't have this thrombosis from the vaccine, so you shouldn't worry about it at all. So all of these cases happened in a very tight window, so between days 6 and 13. So it was really that time frame. But if you have that, as of today, we could check these anti-platelet antibodies. And antiplatelet antibodies are something that we do see in this heparin-induced problem. And then with the history and all that kind of stuff, we'd be able to figure out that that's what you likely have. And the treatment is different. So if you have this, we probably would give you what we call IVIG, which is a kind of someone else's antibodies. To kind of counteract that, and we'd give you a non-heparin blood thinner, and then potentially take out the clot if it was in a really worrisome spot. But very treatable, and in fact, those people that died received heparin, which in retrospect they shouldn't have received that because they didn't know that that's what was going on.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. You may have answered this question, but this is one of the questions that the group had. Why is there a push to vaccinate more people of color in the African American community? Why is that such an important thing right now?
Yeah, it's interesting because everyone's pushing, aren't they? Suddenly people that wouldn't care about you are starting to care about you. And at the end of the day, we need to get herd immunity. We need at least 70%, and most people are saying even closer to 85% of the entire population for COVID to go away. So, they're pushing on all ends. And, I kind of talked about, how things have changed. But, the folks with the highest vaccine hesitancy today are white Republican younger men. So, now the newest push is going to be with them. But, at the end of the day, this is a life-saving treatment. I mean, I can't overstate how amazing this vaccine is, and the potential to save lives. But, again, you have people caring for, Black and brown people that I think historically they haven't reached out to us before.
Yeah, and that's a great observation. Even where I work, this thing about disparities as at an all-time high in terms of addressing those issues. What are the disparities, and having these big conversations, but kind of coming up with not much just yet in terms of intervention. So, yeah. The other thing with regards to boosters, here's another question. Someone, do we go back to where we started when it comes to after next year? How are we notified? And and you may not have the answer to the logistics around next year, and the Light of the World and Eastern Star and See Me Church. How does that happen? IU Health, Eskenazi,
Yeah. So, I think the dust needs to settle, somewhat. I think even today, when you look at the way vaccines have been administered, it doesn't make a ton of sense. Today, so some people have been vaccinated, some people have cards, some people, don't have. I'll give you the perfect example. So I got my vaccine, very early, like right when it came out. But today, I still get stuff from in.gov saying you're up to get your vaccine. So they have no way of knowing that I got vaccinated. So, at the end of the day, we need to regroup, figure out who's been vaccinated, and figure out, based on the science, based on the data, how often you need to be vaccinated. So we have a vaccine schedule for, everything else, including the flu, and, we're going to need to get one for COVID, once we figure it out.
All right. Thank you for that. Now, we're church people. We attend churches, and some big, some small. And so I'm going to ask some church related kind of questions as it relates to, our facilities. Some of our churches will be opening up, let's say in the pretty soon. I don't know how soon. What is your recommendation? Open, stay closed, somewhere in between? What are your thoughts about reopening at this juncture?
Yeah, I think that, it's one of those things where what I say today may not hold true for tomorrow. I think that, our community leaders, including the church, need to know what the infection rate is in the population. If the infection rate is high, we know that if you are in a closed space, you're going to spread COVID. If the members of the congregation are vaccinated, and people are able to be distanced, and the circulation in your facility is good, then you might be able to hold services with no issue at all. And people, particularly during the spring and summer, may really want to think about, is there something we can do outside, get together and be safer. But I think there is not one solution that fits everybody. I think that at the end of the day, whether or not you're vaccinated, everyone else is not, stay masked, be aware, cognizant, know that certain things, I know that, singing and that kind of thing is, common, that spreads COVID. So, make sure that your choir is, vaccinated, that they're away from, members that may not be vaccinated. But I think that, that's really something that even as individual leaders, you can reach out to the public health department and let them know your situation and get some real good, individual advice about that, because it really isn't one size fits all.
Okay. It's interesting. As a church, things like grace and forgiveness and mercy, play itself out in how we understand God or in our work and our spaces. And I think about, with regards to the rules and how, should we be gracious to folk? And obviously the answer is no. If someone wants to come within 5 feet versus 6 feet, or take their mask off in church, certainly there ought not be no grace there. Would you agree with that, or what are your thoughts about that?
I'll probably regret putting myself out there, but I completely agree. I mean, I think that, at the end of the day, this is a public health emergency. And because of political reasons, we're not treating it that way. You're not allowed to drink and drive. You're not allowed to, drive around without a seatbelt. So we know that COVID kills people. People not wearing masks have killed other people. So, I think, when you think about some of these decisions, think about it, not in the political sense, because I think if you turn on the TV, you'll get someone to support you one way or the other. But, what are you doing for your parishioners? What are you doing for each other to promote health?
Okay, thank you for that. And here's a question from Pat Morgan. She says, if I receive Moderna or Pfizer vaccine, can I switch to a J&J booster or vice versa if one is needed later this year? So,
yeah, I think that's something that we just don't know at this point. I suspect that, at the end of the day, it probably won't matter, because, what we're calling a booster, for, one might be a whole new shot for someone else. The whole point of the booster is that it's covering the variants that are in the population at the time. And as I already mentioned, your antibodies from that first shot are probably gone. So, it's very similar to getting a new shot, but, that's something that, we are going to figure out. And, as you can imagine, most treatments don't have 3 different companies, giving you the same treatment. Eventually something is going to come out as the one that we're doing. So I think, a year or 2 from now, we may not be talking about Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer or, whatever. We're just going to be talking about the COVID vaccine, and we're not going to even care or know who the manufacturer is.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Wright. And someone asked another question, and I think you answered it about social distancing, cleaning, disinfecting before and after worship service, and also checking for temperatures. Do you recommend that during, entering church spaces?
Yeah, I have some mixed feelings about that. We all know that you could be asymptomatic, not have a temperature, and still have COVID and pass it along to people. So there's that part of it. Yeah. But if you do have a temperature, that's not a good thing. So I think that it makes some sense to do that. I wouldn't expend all my resources trying to do that, though. If you have to use person power to do it, you have to buy all sorts of stuff. If you have to record it, then it may not be worth it, because at the end of the day, it's not really preventing you from passing COVID along.
Okay. All right. I think those were the questions. James, Reverend Melton, if there are any other questions out there that need to be asked, I think this is the time to do it. I don't have any other questions. Do you guys have any questions out there?
Chaplain, I just put one more in there. What are the indoor recommendations Dr. Wright shared? 3 feet versus 6 feet.
Yeah, so that is an interesting phenomenon. So clearly, the CDC is saying 6 feet for general, and then 3 foot for schools. We happen to have this 3 foot for schools because they were able to study it. At the end of the day, is it 3 foot in schools because children are less likely to transmit COVID? Is it because they had better circulation of air? The answer is probably yes. So at the end of the day, I think that 6 feet is what I would recommend for everybody. If you happen to be in a school around a bunch of children, then it's probably 3 foot. But that's the difference. Circulation in the school and having all children, I think, makes a difference. So I think 6 feet is what I would put my money on.
Yeah. And so I'm going to ask another question. I think you answered this in the presentation. Is one vaccine recommended over another when you have underlying health conditions? And I think you mentioned some of those. It was pretty clear to me, but I would like for you to respond to that if you can. Someone else just check.
Yeah, I would say, really not one versus the other. I think, again, the only caveat I would have is if you're 18 to 49 and a woman, I would recommend that you get the Pfizer or the Moderna over the Johnson & Johnson just because of the clotting risk. Johnson & Johnson is kind of an ideal vaccine. I mean, it's one dose, it doesn't require, you guys are probably all aware that, they're giving it in places where people are able to walk up to, get the vaccine without an appointment. And again, that goes back to what we were saying about, eventually that's going to be problematic because, how are we going to record that people actually got vaccinated in, any kind of, central way. But now we're desperate, in quotes, as a nation to get as many people vaccinated, as we can. I did see that question in the chat about the 12 to 15-year-old trials. I think everyone's hope is that the Pfizer will be approved before the fall, before school starts. They have data, they've already sought approval. So, the hope would be that, it's going to happen within the next month, and that'll give time for kids in that age range to be vaccinated before. Again, to be clear, to hit that 90%, to get herd immunity, we're going to need children to be vaccinated. We're going to need those Republicans to get vaccinated. We're going to need immigrant, we're going to need, everyone to be vaccinated. Otherwise, we're just going to be back where we started.
Yeah. And so, my question, compared to other countries around the world, where do we rank with regards to, and how the politics play itself out here compared to around the world? Or do you have an answer to that?
Well, I'd say, and this is opinion, and this is definitely opinion. I say that we're doing okay. I think that certainly in the previous administration we weren't doing okay. People died because of decisions that were made or not made. I think people continue to die because of that. There are countries around the world that are currently suffering more than we are. And they're suffering doing some of the things that we're doing now. For instance, Brazil, they seem to be under control. Their leadership was very similar to our previous leadership, chose to not have mask mandates and that kind of thing. And as I already mentioned, they're back at the starting point. Their hospitals are full. They don't have enough vaccines, and they're doing, poorly. India, for instance, was a leader with vaccines, so much so that they were giving vaccines to other countries. And now they're back where they started with, hospitalizations and people dying.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Wright. I'm going to hand it over to Reverend Melton. Do you have any final? Did you want to say something? Go ahead.
There are two more questions that just checked. So make sure I ask those. One is I want to make sure we answer the question: what is the process for a church organization to become a satellite location for vaccine administration?
Yeah, I think that's a great question for the public health department. And, again, I think that, I would recommend reaching out to them. Really the only, I don't want to say the only, but, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is going to be the best option for that. And you guys have all probably heard that, with the vaccines, it's been a supply and demand, kind of thing. Initially there wasn't enough supply. People were wanting it, and now we're the reverse, where we got plenty of supply and people aren't demanding it. So I think we are going to see, particularly with the Johnson & Johnson coming back, lots of creative things. We're going to see churches with satellite clinics. We're going to see, ice cream vans that instead of giving out ice cream, we're going to be giving out vaccines. People taking the vaccine to folks. So I think if that's something that you are interested in doing, I think that you're going to get some support from the public health department.
Well,
Thank you. Thank you. Let me do this. Brother Kingrow, I wanted to make sure you came back on, and I want to thank Dr. Wright, thank Leroy, and then thank you, Chaplain Joe, for moderating and those that sent in questions. And so Brother Morgan, Brother Wendell, for the men's ministry, thank you for allowing this platform. And so Brother Kingrow, would you just give some running comments, and thank you all again for joining us, and we're still
I want to
together.
thank Dr. Wright and Brother Lewis and everybody this morning. And I have just a bit of a more than a statement than a question. I was amazed when I heard Dr. King say the other day how little the percentage of Blacks, in bringing it close to home here in Indianapolis, were according to others. But and I think we all should serve as ambassadors in trying to get people to get our people to get this vaccination, knowing the safety of it and what it can do to help our community. If I had any doubt about the vaccination, I would change my mind. I know what the COVID will do. And if I had any concerns about the vaccination, I think I'll take my chances with the vaccination and encourage people in our household, in our neighborhood, and whomever around the country you speak to, because it has been proven that it's really doing a good job. And I hope that we continue to do that. Thank you all once again for a very wonderful presentation. Thank you, Dr. Wright.
thank you.
Brother Leroy, did you have any comments would you like to share? I didn't want to omit you.
Not really. I do want to say, and to echo what Kingrow has said, getting the vaccine is definitely, if you're thinking of it this way, the lesser of two risks. I was offered the vaccine very early on, and as many people, very hesitant, did not get it, and I did end up with COVID, and that was not fun at all. So I did get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine 2 weeks ago. I am good. So I think that I'm not going to, in that health factor risk of being a woman age 18 to 50. So I think I'll be fine, but I do want you to know, if a man my age that works out 6 days a week, thoroughly healthy, can get knocked out by this virus, then someone that is not as healthy could possibly and has died. So I think the risk of the vaccinations will definitely outweigh the risk of getting COVID. So please, if you have not gotten vaccinated, please do so. And again, echoing Kingrow and Dr. Wright, it's the best option for us. And again, thank you to Dr. Wright for being here. Again, lending your expertise and your time for a Saturday morning. We know that you're busy throughout the week saving lives, but we appreciate you spending some time with us this morning. Thank you so much. And if you don't have anything else, I will end my comments. And Mr. Melton, you can definitely close your meeting with that.
Okay, thank you. Brother Morgan, thank you. Brother Smith, thank you. And so if there, do you have any announcements, Brother Mike? And then I would like Brother Firefighter Tony, will you to close us out in prayer after Brother Mike, and we'll conclude, and thank you.
Yeah, the only announcement that I have at this time, and I would like to give a great big thanks to our speaker because he was full of information and it was clear and precise, and I appreciate that. It's on layman's terms. So, but the announcement that I have is that the next men's meeting is on May the 8th at 10 a.m. And we'll try to have another guest speaker for that one also. That's all I have. Tony, you want to say something about the camp?
Yes, our the St. Florian Youth Leadership Development Summer Camp, we are accepting applications on our website, stfloriancenter.org. We have young people ages 6 to 17. We have some incredible things that we're doing this summer, from robotics to utilizing 3D printers. We're actually going to make some mask shields and the plastic door openers and different things. But we have a gamut of activities, and we are hiring high school students to be a part of our youth employment program. So contact us for our 29th year operating our summer camp. Amen. If we could all bow our heads to close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Most Gracious Father, we just thank you for this glorious day. We thank you for this men's fellowship to receive information about COVID-19 so we can remain healthy and share this information throughout our churches and our community, Lord, to keep us safe so we can continue to magnify and lift up your holy name, Lord. Thank you for all the individuals that allowed this to come together to make it happen, Lord. And let us not keep this information to ourselves, but to take it out into the community so we can serve and please you, Father. We pray for traveling mercies for anyone on the line that is traveling today. Father, we ask you a special blessing on each family represented and each one of our church families, Lord. We ask a very special prayer for all of our pastors in the CME church and any pastor that's lifting up the word of God, Lord. As we pray in your most heavenly name, amen.
Amen. Amen.
Amen. Have a good rest of your Saturdays.
Man,
Amen. Thank
Amen.
you. Everybody have a
Y'all
great
what to
one.
go do.
Thank you. Thank you,
God
Doctor.
bless. Be safe.
Brother
God
King
bless.
Rowe, we miss your voice, man.
Well,
Night all.
Hey, Joe,
we will try to do
Joe,
something
how are you?
about it.
Hey, man. Hey, man, what's going on?
All right, thank you, man, very much for the day, man.
Are you welcome?
Wonderful.
Thank you all for having me.
Awesome
Yes, sir.
job, everybody. Awesome job.
Okay,
Praise
night all.